Martha Jane Canary or Cannary, May 1, 1852 August 1, 1903, better known as Calamity Jane, was an American frontierswoman and professional scout known for her claims of being an acquaintance of Wild Bill Hickok and fighting against Indians. Late in her life, she appeared in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show and at the 1901 Pan-American Exposition. She is said to have exhibited compassion to others, especially to the sick and needy. This facet of her character contrasted with her daredevil ways and helped to make her a noted frontier figure. She was also known for her habit of wearing men's attire. Much of what she claimed to have witnessed and participated in cannot be proven. It is known that she was illiterate, an itinerant alcoholic, and an occasional prostitute. Early life. Much of the information about the early years of Calamity Jane's life comes from the autobiographical booklet which she dictated in 1896, written for publicity purposes. She was about to begin a tour in which she appeared in dime museums around the United States, and it was intended to help attract audiences. Some of the information in the pamphlet is exaggerated or even completely inaccurate. Calamity Jane was born on May 1, 1852 as Martha Jane Canary, or Cannary, in Princeton, within Mercer County, Missouri. Her parents were listed in the 1860 census as living about 7 miles, 11 kilometers, northeast of Princeton in Ravenna. Her father Robert Wilson Cannary had a gambling problem and her mother Charlotte M. Cannary had spent time working as a prostitute. Jane was the eldest of 6 children, having 2 brothers and 3 sisters. In 1865, Robert and his family moved by wagon train from Missouri to Virginia City, Montana. In 1866, Charlotte died of pneumonia along the way in Blackfoot, Montana. After arriving in Virginia City in the spring of 1866, Robert took his 6 children on to Salt Lake City, Utah. They arrived in the summer, and Robert supposedly started farming on 40 acres, 16 ha, of land. The family had only been in Salt Lake City for a year when he died in 1867. At age 14, Martha Jane took charge of her 5 younger siblings, loaded up their wagon once more, and took the family to Fort Bridger, Wyoming Territory, where they arrived in May 1868. From there, they traveled on the Union Pacific Railroad to Piedmont, Wyoming. In Piedmont, Jane took whatever jobs she could find to provide for her large family. She worked as a dishwasher, cook, waitress, dance hall girl, nurse, and ox team driver. Finally, in 1874, she claimed she found work as a scout at Fort Russell. During that time, she also began her on and off employment as a prostitute at the Fort Laramie 3-Mile Hog Ranch. Accounts from that period describe Jane as being extremely attractive and a pretty, dark-eyed girl. She moved on to a rougher, mostly outdoor and adventurous life on the Great Plains. Acquiring the nickname, Jane was involved in several campaigns in the long-running military conflicts with American Indians. Her claim was that, "It was during this campaign that I was christened Calamity Jane. It was on Goose Creek, Wyoming where the town of Sheridan is now located. Captain Egan was in command of the post. We were ordered out to quell an uprising of the Indians, and were out for several days, had numerous skirmishes during which 6 of the soldiers were killed and several severely wounded. When on returning to the post we were ambushed about 1.5 miles from our destination. When fired upon, Captain Egan was shot. I was riding in advance and on hearing the firing turned in my saddle and saw the captain reeling in his saddle as though about to fall. I turned my horse and galloped back with all haste to his side and got there in time to catch him as he was falling. I lifted him onto my horse in front of me and succeeded in getting him safely to the fort. Captain Egan, on recovering, laughingly said, "I name you Calamity Jane, the heroine of the plains. I have borne that name up to the present time. Captain Jack Crawford served under Generals Wesley Merritt and George Crook. According to the Montana Anaconda Standard of April 19, 1904, he stated that Calamity Jane never saw service in any capacity under either General Crook or General Miles. She never saw a lynching and never was in an Indian fight. She was simply a notorious character, dissolute and devilish, but possessed a generous streak which made her popular. It may be that she exaggerated this story, or even completely fabricated it. Even during her lifetime, not everyone accepted her version as true. A popular belief is that she instead acquired it as a result of her warnings to men that to offend her was to court calamity. It is possible that Jane was not part of her name until the nickname was coined for her. It is certain, however, that she was known by that nickname by 1876, because the arrival of the Hickok wagon train was reported in Deadwood's newspaper The Black Hills Pioneer on July 15, 1876, with the headline, "Calamity Jane has arrived." Another unverified story in her autobiographical pamphlet is that her detachment was ordered to the Bighorn River under General Crook in 1875. She swam the Platte River and traveled 90 miles, 140 kilometers, at top speed while wet and cold in order to deliver important dispatches. She became ill afterwards and spent a few weeks recuperating. She then rode to Fort Laramie in Wyoming and joined a wagon train headed north in July 1876. The second part of her story is verified. She was at Fort Laramie in July 1876, and she did join a wagon train that included Wild Bill Hickok. That was where she first met Hickok, contrary to her later claims, and that was how she happened to come to Deadwood. Deadwood and Wild Bill Hickok. Calamity Jane accompanied the Newton-Jenny party into Rapid City in 1875, along with California Joe and Valentine McGillicuddy. Around that time, her youthful good looks were gone, her skin was leathery and tanned by sun and wind exposure on the high plains, she was muscular and masculine, and her hair was stringy and seldom washed. In 1876, Calamity Jane settled in the area of Deadwood, South Dakota in the Black Hills. There she became friends with Dora Dufresne, the Black Hills' leading madam, and she was occasionally employed by her. She also became friendly with Wild Bill Hickok and Charlie Utter, having traveled with them to Deadwood in Utter's wagon train. McCormick claim. On September 6, 1941, the U.S. Department of Public Welfare granted old age assistance to a Jean Hickok Burkhart McCormick who claimed to be the legal offspring of Martha Jane Canary and James Butler Hickok. She presented evidence that Calamity Jane and Wild Bill had married at Benson's Landing, Montana Territory, now Livingston, Montana, on September 25, 1873. The documentation was written in a Bible and presumably signed by 2 ministers and numerous witnesses. However, McCormick's claim has been vigorously challenged because of a variety of discrepancies. McCormick later published a book with letters purported to be from Calamity Jane to her daughter. In them, Calamity Jane says that she had been married to Hickok and that Hickok was the father of McCormick, who was born September 25, 1873, and was given up for adoption to a Captain Jim O'Neill and his wife. During the period when the alleged child was born, Calamity Jane was allegedly working as a scout for the Army, and at the time of Hickok's death, he had recently married Agnes Lake Thatcher. Calamity Jane does seem to have had 2 daughters, although the father's identity is unknown. In the late 1880s, she returned to Deadwood with a child whom she claimed to be her daughter. At her request, a benefit was held in one of the theaters to raise money for her daughter's education in St. Martin's Academy at Sturgis, South Dakota, a nearby Catholic boarding school. The benefit raised a large sum, Jane got drunk and spent a considerable portion of the money that same night and left with the child the next day. Esteline Bennett was living in Deadwood at that time and had spoken briefly with Jane a few days before the benefit. She thought that Jane honestly wanted her daughter to have an education and that the drunken binge was just an example of her inability to curb her impulses and carry through long-range plans, which Bennett saw as typical of her class. Bennett later heard that Jane's daughter did get an education, and grew up and married well. After the death of Wild Bill Hickok, Jane also claimed that, following Hickok's death, she went after his murderer Jack McCall with a meat cleaver, since she had left her guns at her residence in the excitement of the moment. However, she never actually confronted McCall. Following his execution for the crime, Jane continued living in the Deadwood area for some time, and at one point she helped save numerous passengers in an overland stagecoach by diverting several Plains Indians who were in pursuit of the vehicle. Stagecoach driver John Slaughter was killed during the pursuit, and Jane took over the reins and drove the stage on to its destination at Deadwood. In late 1876 or 1878, Jane nursed the victims of a smallpox epidemic in the Deadwood area. Final years. In 1881, Jane bought a ranch west of Miles City, Montana along the Yellowstone River, where she kept an inn. She later married Clinton Burke from Texas and moved to Boulder, where she once again made an attempt in the inn business. In 1887, she gave birth to daughter Jessie, who was adopted by foster parents. In 1893, Calamity Jane started to appear in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show as a storyteller. She also participated in the 1901 Pan-American Exposition. At that time, she was depressed and an alcoholic. Her addiction to liquor was evident even in her younger years. For example, on June 10, 1876, she rented a horse and buggy in Cheyenne for a 1-mile joyride to Fort Russell and back, but she was so drunk that she passed right by her destination without noticing it and finally ended up about 90 miles, 140 kilometers, away at Fort Laramie. Death. Jane returned to the Black Hills in the spring of 1903, and brothel Madame Dora Dufresne was still running her business. For the next few months, she earned her keep by cooking and doing the laundry for Dora's brothel girls in Belle Fourche. In late July, she traveled by ore train to Terry, South Dakota, a small mining village near Deadwood, and stayed at the Callaway Hotel. She died at the age of 51, or 53 or 56. It was reported that she had been drinking heavily while on board the train and had become sick to her stomach. The conductor, S.G. Tillett, carried her off the train. A bartender secured a room for her at the Callaway Hotel, and a doctor was summoned. She died almost immediately afterwards on Saturday, August 1, 1903 from inflammation of the bowels and pneumonia. A bundle of unsent letters to her daughter was allegedly found among her few belongings. Some of these letters were set to music in an art song cycle by 20th-century composer Libby Larsen called Songs from Letters. Those letters were first made public by Jean McCormick as part of her claim to be the daughter of Jane and Hickok, but their authenticity is not accepted by some, largely because there is ample evidence that Jane was functionally illiterate. Calamity Jane was buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery, South Dakota next to Wild Bill Hickok. 4 of the men who planned her funeral later stated that Wild Bill Hickok had absolutely no use for Jane while he was alive, so they decided to play a posthumous joke on him by giving her a resting place by his side. Another account states, in compliance with Jane's dying requests, the Society of Black Hills Pioneers took charge of her funeral and burial in Mount Moriah Cemetery beside Wild Bill. Not just old friends, but the morbidly curious and many who would not have acknowledged Calamity Jane when she was alive, overflowed the First Methodist Church for the funeral services on August 4 and followed the hearse up the steep winding road to Deadwood's Boot Hill. Major media representations. Films. The Plainsman is a 1936 film starring Gary Cooper as Wild Bill Hickok and Jean Arthur as Calamity Jane. In Young Bill Hickok with Roy Rogers, 1940, she was portrayed by Sally Payne. Calamity Jane was played by Frances Farmer in the 1941 western The Badlands of Dakota. Calamity Jane was played by Jane Russell in the 1948 comedy The Paleface. Calamity Jane and Sam Bass was a 1949 film. Calamity was played by Yvonne DiCarlo, Sam Bass by Howard Duff. Calamity Jane was a 1953 musical western film from Warner Brothers starring Doris Day and Howard Keel as Wild Bill Hickok. It won the Best Song Oscar for Secret Love, by Asterisk and Paul Francis Webster. In the 1984 made-for-TV film, Calamity Jane, she was portrayed by Jane Alexander. In the 1995 Disney movie Tall Tale, The Unbelievable Adventures of Pecos Bill, she was portrayed by Catherine O'Hara as a mythic figure, acquainted with Paul Bunyan and John Henry, and as Pecos Bill's jilted sweetheart and as a sheriff or deputy of some sort. In the 1995 film Wild Bill, Calamity Jane was portrayed by Ellen Barkin. In the 1995 film Buffalo Girls, Calamity Jane was portrayed by Angelica Houston. Jane was portrayed by Sylvie Testud in the 2009 French movie Lucky Luke. Documentary. Calamity Jane, Legend of the West, film, Calamity Jane, Wild West Legend, directed by Gregory Monroe, 2014, Games. In the Facebook application Frontierville there is a suit-like outfit for female characters called the Calamity Jane outfit. She appeared as a side character in the computer RPG Worlds of Ultima, Martian Dreams, 1991. In the King's Isle entertainment game Pirate 101 Calamity Jane is one of the Magnificent Seven. Calamity Jane appeared as a side main character in the video game Wild Arms, 1996. Calamity Jane appeared in the mobile online game Fate/Grand Order as an archer-class servant able to be summoned by the main character, 2015. The game Calamity the Natural World, a line of educational games made in the 90s for the PlayStation by Lightspan Adventures, stars Calamity Jane. Plays. Productions. Calamity Jane the play by Catherine Ann Jones. Empire State Theater, Albany, New York. Promenade Theater, New York, New York, with Estelle Parsons. Santa Paula Theater, Santa Paula, CA. Wimberley Players, Wimberley, Texas. Plaza Playhouse, Carpinteria, CA. Calamity Jane the Musical by Catherine Ann Jones. South Jersey Regional Theater, Summers Point, New Jersey. Ojai Arts Theater, Ojai, CA. Camino Real Theater, San Juan Capistrano, CA. Literature. Books. Calamity Jane was an important fictional character in the Deadwood Dick series of dime novels, beginning with the first appearance of Deadwood Dick in Beatles' Half-Dime Library issue number 1 in 1877. This series, written by Edward Wheeler, established her with a reputation as a Wild West heroine and probably did more to enhance her familiarity to the public than any of her real-life exploits. There is no evidence that she was consulted by Wheeler or approved the Deadwood Dick stories, so the character in the stories was entirely fictitious as were the events described, but the fictional adventures were muddled in the public mind with the real Jane. Calamity Jane was the title character in a serial published in New York's Street and Smith's Weekly, 1882, under the title, Calamity Jane, Queen of the Plains, by the author Reckless Ralph. The science fiction writer A. Bertram Chandler included a character named Calamity Jane Arlen in his far future novels set on the Frontier Rim worlds, a space analogue of the Old West. A fictitious fight between Calamity Jane and an imposter is depicted in Thomas Berger's novel Little Big Man, 1964. Jane is the central character in Larry McMurtry's book Buffalo Girls, a novel, 1990. Jane is a central character in Pete Dexter's novel Deadwood, 1986. J.T. Edson features Calamity Jane as a character in a number of his books, as a stand-alone character. In Cold Deck, Hot Lead Calamity spells Trouble Trouble Trail the Bullwhip Breed, the Cow Thieves, the Whip and the War Lance and the Big Hunt, and as a romantic interest of the character Mark Counter, in the Wildcats, the Bad Bunch, Guns in the Night and others. An alternate universe version of Jane is a character in the short story Deadwood in Corsets and Clockwork, 2011, a steampunk anthology. The story also features Jesse James. In Calamity's Wake, 2013, a novel of historical fiction written by Natalie Cable, Martha, or Calamity Jane, is one of two main narrators, the other is Jane's daughter Miette. Calamity Jane, Legend de El West, written by Gregory Monroe, 2010, is the only French biography to this day. Calamity Jane appears in Michael Crichton's novel Dragon Teeth, 2017. Comics. Calamity Jane figures as a main character in an album of the same name of the Franco-Belgian comics series Lucky Luke, created by Maurice and René Goscinny. Also, she features in the album Ghost Hunt, created by Maurice and Lo Hartog van Bonda. Music. Calamity Jane and Wild Bill Hickok are featured in the song Deadwood Mountain by the country duo Big and Rich. Some of her purported letters were set to music in an art song cycle by 20th century composer Libby Larsen, called Songs from Letters. Soprano Dora Orenstein commissioned 5 pieces compiled under the title Urban Diva. The second piece, Ben Johnston's Calamity Jane to her daughter, is a theatrical setting of selected letters. Calamity Jane is a song by Grant Lee Phillips on Virginia Creeper, 2004. Calamity Jane is a song by Kia Hartwood on Wishing Chair's Underdog CD, 2005. Elaine Basham, Chloe Mons, Rodolphe Berger released the album La Ballade de Calamity Jane, 2006, based on Jane's letters to her daughter. Calamity Jane is a song by Czech rock band Cabot. Calamity Jane is a song by Chris Anderson on his album The Crown, 2004. The 1953 movie Calamity Jane with Doris Day and Howard Keel features the song, My Secret Love, which won the 1954 Academy Award for Best Music Original Song. Television. The name Calamity is given to the children's character played by Nancy Gilbert in the 1955-1956 syndicated television series, Buffalo Bill, Jr., with Dick Jones as the fictitious Buffalo Bill, Jr., and Harry Cheshire as Judge Ben Fair and Square Wiley. In the episode Calamity, December 13, 1959, of the ABC/Warner Brothers Western series, Cold Point 45, Dottie Heath is cast as Calamity Jane and Joan Taylor as a woman doctor, Ellen McGraw. In the storyline, series character Christopher Colt, played by Wade Preston, hires Calamity Jane to drive the stagecoach containing Dr. McGraw and the vaccine needed for the smallpox outbreak in Deadwood. Colt is unsure if Calamity can handle the job because miners and Indians seek to steal the valuable medication. Season 5 of Have Gun, Will Travel included an episode called The Cure, first broadcast on May 20, 1961, with an alcoholic Jane, Norma Crane as Martha Jane Conroy, seeking revenge from a promoter who had replaced the real Jane with a younger woman. In an episode of Bonanza, Calamity Over the Comstock, 1963, Stephanie Powers plays Calamity Jane, who visits Virginia City along with Doc Holliday. In this primarily comedic episode, she is rescued by Little Joe, who at first thinks she is a male. She becomes infatuated with him, and he receives threats from Doc, who covets Jane for himself. At her urging, and threat, Doc demurs from facing down Joe and Jane, and Doc exit town. No official or unofficial documentation exists suggesting that Doc Holliday and Jane ever met during their lifetimes. It is highly unlikely that they met considering the geographical distances between them during their lives. The television movie Calamity Jane, 1984, featured her life story, including her alleged marriage to Wild Bill Hickok and the daughter she purportedly gave up. Actress Jane Alexander portrayed Calamity and was nominated for an Emmy in 1985 for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Limited Series or Special. The show also featured an early performance of Sarah Gilbert as Calamity's daughter, Jean, at age 7. Jane is the central character in Larry McMurtry's book Buffalo Girls, a novel, 1990, and in the 1995 TV adaptation of the same name, Jane is played by Angelica Houston, with Sam Elliott as Wild Bill Hickok. In 1997 a cartoon series on Kids WB called The Legend of Calamity Jane depicted a young Jane, voiced by Barbara Weber Scaff. In the 2004 to 2006 HBO series Deadwood, Calamity Jane was portrayed by Robin Weigert.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.